Helen Hirsh, you have a very interesting job at Top 60 Over 60. What exactly is your job?
Well, I founded Top 60 Over 60 out of a perceived need. And that need had to do with my sense of um, being invisible as I got older, and less relevant. I had a career in education. I was a head of a girls' school here in Ottawa for a few years. And prior to that, I was the one of the founding executive and founding members of the Ontario Principals Council, always leadership positions. And then I was a secondary school principal in the public school system here. So, I was used to being asked questions and so on. But I realized in my mid-60s, even though I had retired at a much earlier age, I was doing not-for-profit work, board work, and I was also working with Catalyst, it's called now. It used to be CESO, the Canadian Executive Services Overseas, and I used my skills and knowledge all over the world, and put to use my expertise and my knowledge. But suddenly something shifted, and it wasn't my gray hair, because I didn't have gray hair then, so it wasn't that, but it was age related. And so I started doing some research and realized that what I was experiencing was internalized ageism. And I was at the same time introduced by a former student to the Center for Social Innovation in Toronto. And I was so encouraged by this whole new area of which I knew nothing, because I had grown up at a different time and social impact wasn't talked about, although I was in education, that I embarked on courses on social entrepreneurship. And then I started Top 60 Over 60 as an answer to the issues related to age diversity and ageism. So what we are is sort of a niche consultancy that promotes age diversity, educates about ageism, and works with older adults to help them overcome it and become the persons that they should be and want to be later in life.
So you became an entrepreneur.
I did.
Was that a bit of a shock to you?
At age 68, and I knew nothing about it. Nothing. I had no idea. I thought entrepreneurs had to be 30 or under, like Mr. Zuckerberg, because that was what I believed. But I just tried it.
What are some of the most interesting things that you found about being an entrepreneur that you didn't expect?
One of the things that I've learned through this experience is that failure is acceptable, and that when I fail, I'm actually learning something that's really important, and it's an opportunity to move on and to do something differently. And that's probably one of the best outcomes of being an entrepreneur, is that I see failure very differently than I would have as a child, as a youth growing up. And I would encourage everybody to think that way, because it's such a neat opportunity to move on and learn something differently. It's the way in which you internalize it and take something from it. So that's one thing. Another thing is that there are so many people out there who are knowledgeable about whatever it is you want to do, that there are resources, and the best way in which you can move forward and succeed is to take advantage of the generous offers of other entrepreneurs, or hubs, accelerators, none of which was I able to access, because they don't cater to older people, which is one of the reasons why I started looking at the entrepreneurial mindset, created a research study that was supported by the Ontario Centre of Workforce Innovation and Ryerson University, at the time it was called Ryerson, to study the impact of ageism on the entrepreneurial mindset of older adults. And that became a program and a course that I delivered, because it was researched, it was successful. And now I'm looking for more opportunities to offer it, because it would be nice if people didn't have to pay for it themselves. And as I did it as a study, as a research study, and was supported, I didn't have to charge anybody to do it. And then, of course, COVID hit, and I couldn't do it anyway. And the Ontario Centre for Workforce Innovation dissolved. So I just had to pivot, as one says, in this area, and I had to start anew. And I had to everything that I did in person, all the workshops and seminars and so on, I started giving online. And because of the pandemic, and because I knew that both youth and older were suffering from loneliness, I hosted a number of We Need to Talk conversations across generations, and everything has been moving forward in constantly new and different ways. It's never the same as I started out.
So from what you've learned, and you take a look at your role as an entrepreneur now versus the senior positions that you had in other organizations, are you surprised at how much you have to do on your own? There isn't a support team there for you. If the computer's not working, you got to figure it out. If the hydro bill hasn't been paid, or the phone bill, or whatever it is, you've got to pay it. If somebody needs to be billed, you got to do it.
That's the other thing. I would say a solo entrepreneurship is not for me, in that I love to be with people. Having been in schools my whole life, for over 55 years, either as a student or a teacher or a principal, I've always been in school. So that's the other reality, is it's tough to be on your own. And as you said, I had to learn everything. I wasn't familiar with CRMs and PowerPoint. I always had somebody who did. So the learning curve was huge. Talk about the brain. And so, and I said, as I said, I started this at age 67, 68, and here I am. It's not like I'm going to be the richest entrepreneur in North America, but that is not what the metric I use for success. What I want to do is what we talked about before, and that is have an impact and change the way people think about getting older in this case. And I really hope, just like the feminist movement that I was part of in the 60s and 70s, that other women didn't have to go through what I had to go through. They called my high school High Heel High, because I was among 3 or 4 women principals, because they weren't around in this public system until sort of the 80s and 90s, whatever. And so I want young people to not fear getting older, because the research shows that already at age 4, children already have a negative bias about aging. Aging is a privilege. Aging is the benefit of time and experience. If people were to frame it differently, the way it should be framed, I think that we'd have a much happier society, and also a much more cohesive one. Because right now, people always are talking about the different generations and they don't get along. Well, that's baloney. They do get along. They may have some differences, and those differences really have to do with the time, the era in which they grew up, and those influences. It's fascinating to learn about those things. So I'm a firm believer in, the multi-generational workforce, and helping businesses accommodate that, because I know that they are the most successful. And
so
yeah,
I actually want to come back to the topic of entrepreneurship, or an entrepreneurial mindset, because, if you go out and apply for a job and you don't get it, you go, okay, what next? But if you say, no, I'm going to start to put something in play. This is my idea. I'm going to start to make it happen. Well, one person saying I'm not interested doesn't stop you. You go, well, I'll go to somebody else, and then someone else, and then something else. And momentum starts to build, because you start building towards something that wasn't there before. Former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, oddly enough, had this great sense about one of the objectives of his presidency was to disabuse people of the idea that it's only success that mattered. He rather wanted to celebrate the fact that people make attempts, because in trying, you ignite things that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And even though you may not achieve what your initial objective was, you help possibly ignite an interest in somebody else and they have success. And then that has a ripple out effect. And so by putting yourself out there and doing it, you're actually making a difference. Here I am, I'm celebrating the fact that at 68, you said, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do this on my own. Because I know I've been doing it for the last 25 years and it's tough, but my gosh, is it ever rewarding.
It is, yeah. And talking about getting older, purpose is so important. And there isn't a day when I don't have something important that I feel like I have to do. And you never know who you're impacting. It's like teaching and whatnot. You really don't know the impact you have. It's only years later sometimes that you find out if it was positive or how positive or whatever. I just spoke to a woman the other day who said, I'd never heard of ageism until I had a conversation with you. I didn't know it existed. This woman was 70 years old. So, so there again, so that I see that as a calling, but I also see it as a need. And so I hope that more people will consider entrepreneurship for themselves. And if I had my druthers, we would have a hub for older adults to learn about it and move.
There's your next entrepreneurial idea right there. And you are demonstrating to people who are entering the next stage of their career that there's still a long road ahead. Thank you very much for sharing a little bit of insight into your career.
My pleasure. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.